The greatest mistake powerful people make is believing that truth always arrives wearing an expensive suit. At precisely 8:15 on a cold Tuesday morning, the executive boardroom of Sterling Dynamics stood on the edge of disaster. Perched atop the 75th floor of Manhattan's newest glass tower, the room overlooked a city that had not yet realized one of its largest corporate acquisitions was only 57 minutes away from complete collapse. The skyline shimmered beneath pale autumn sunlight. Ferries glided across the Hudson River, and thousands of commuters hurried through another ordinary day, unaware that $12 billion rested on a single impossible decision being debated high above their heads. Nathan Sterling stood silently at the head of the polished walnut conference table. At 39 years old, the white billionaire had built Sterling Dynamics from a struggling technology startup into one of the nation's most influential innovation companies. Newspapers often described him as a visionary. Investors called him fearless. Employees admired his discipline. Yet this morning, none of those titles carried any comfort. 3 enormous digital walls filled the boardroom with glowing financial projections, artificial intelligence simulations, and international acquisition models. Every few seconds, another warning indicator flashed across the screens in deep crimson, reminding everyone that the predictive system had found a fatal inconsistency hidden somewhere inside millions of calculations. Around the table sat 20 of the country's most respected specialists, economists from prestigious universities, artificial intelligence architects recruited from Silicon Valley, financial analysts whose advice commanded extraordinary consulting fees. For nearly 7 exhausting hours, they had challenged one another's theories, rewritten algorithms, launched fresh simulations, and examined every variable imaginable. Each attempt produced the same devastating conclusion. If they could not identify the hidden flaw before the overseas markets opened, the acquisition would fail, investors would withdraw, and years of negotiations would disappear before sunrise reached Europe. Tension settled over the room like heavy winter fog. One senior economist removed his glasses and quietly rubbed his tired eyes. Another expert leaned back in frustration before saying, "We have exhausted every scenario." A software engineer shook his head. "The artificial intelligence model is correct. The acquisition cannot proceed." Across the table, Sterling Dynamics Vice President Richard Coleman folded his arms with visible irritation. Tall, impeccably dressed, and known for his absolute confidence in elite credentials, Richard glanced toward Nathan before speaking firmly. "We cannot afford amateur opinions today. Only verified expertise belongs in this room." Nathan did not answer immediately. His blue eyes remained fixed on the sea of impossible numbers illuminating the walls. Every instinct told him to trust the specialists he had spent years assembling. They represented the very best minds available. If they could not solve the problem, perhaps no one could. Outside the conference room, the executive floor continued its carefully orchestrated rhythm. Administrative assistants carried documents between offices. Attorneys prepared final contracts. Fresh coffee arrived on silver service carts. Near the far end of the marble hallway, almost unnoticed among the movement, Ava Brooks quietly pushed a housekeeping cart toward the executive wing. At 28 years old, the black housekeeper moved with calm precision, adjusting chairs, polishing glass panels, and replacing fresh water pitchers before important meetings began. Most executives had never learned her name. They simply appreciated that every room somehow appeared perfect before they entered. As Ava reached the open doorway of the boardroom, flashing crimson indicators reflected briefly across the polished floor. She glanced toward the towering screens for only a few seconds while continuing to push her cart. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. She slowed. Her eyes traveled carefully across the equations, the predictive models, and one overlooked assumption buried inside the simulation. Without saying a word, she continued walking another few feet before quietly stopping beside the hallway window. She looked once more toward the conference room, then back at the glowing screens. Inside, another expert declared the acquisition impossible. Richard Coleman nodded with certainty. Nathan slowly closed the presentation file in front of him, preparing to accept the worst financial defeat of his career. At that exact moment, a soft but unmistakably confident voice drifted into the silent boardroom. "Excuse me, sir." Every head turned toward the doorway. Ava stood beside her cleaning cart with respectful composure, her gray housekeeping uniform contrasting sharply against the expensive business suits surrounding the table. She met Nathan Sterling's eyes without arrogance, without fear, and without hesitation. I believe everyone is trying to solve the wrong problem. If you would allow me exactly 1 minute, I think I can show you why. The boardroom fell into complete silence. Even the quiet hum of the climate control system seemed louder than the breathing of 20 accomplished specialists who now stared toward the young housekeeper standing beside her cleaning cart. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Richard Coleman was the first to react. A faint smile crossed his face, though it carried no warmth. He slowly leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands across the conference table. "This is exactly what happens when security becomes too relaxed," he said calmly. "Our company is minutes away from losing $12 billion, and now we are accepting advice from housekeeping." A few consultants exchanged uncomfortable glances while others looked down at their tablets, unwilling to become involved. Nathan Sterling remained standing near the center display, his attention fixed entirely on Ava Brooks. Unlike Richard, he noticed something unusual. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was not nervous. She was not searching for approval. She simply stood with quiet patience, as though she had already accepted whatever answer he might give. Nathan finally spoke. "What is your name?" "Ava Brooks, sir." "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years." "Have you ever studied artificial intelligence?" Ava smiled gently before answering. "Not officially, sir." Richard let out a quiet laugh. "Then this conversation is finished." Nathan raised one hand without taking his eyes off Ava. The room immediately became silent again. "You said everyone is solving the wrong problem," Nathan continued. "What makes you believe that?" Ava glanced toward the glowing projections. "Because everyone is trying to prove the model is correct." She paused before adding softly, "Nobody is asking whether the first assumption should have existed at all." The sentence lingered in the room. Several analysts instinctively turned back toward the screens. Richard shook his head. "That assumption has already been validated 6 times. Ava nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. The assumption has been validated. The question has not." Nathan looked toward the digital countdown clock mounted beside the largest display. 51 minutes remained before the overseas market opened. He had trusted these experts with every major decision for years. Yet after 7 hours, they had reached nothing but failure. He slowly stepped away from the presentation console. "You have exactly 1 minute," he said quietly. Richard immediately objected. "Nathan, this is irresponsible." Nathan answered without looking away from Ava. 1 minute cannot cost us more than 7 hours already have." Ava thanked him with a small nod before gently leaving her cleaning cart beside the doorway. She walked toward the massive display wall with measured steps, her soft shoes making almost no sound against the polished marble floor. 20 pairs of eyes followed her every movement. She did not touch the keyboard immediately. Instead, she studied the charts in complete silence. Her gaze moved slowly across currency exchanges, shipping projections, machine learning confidence intervals, logistics forecasts, and predictive market behavior. 30 seconds passed. 40. The specialists exchanged puzzled looks. Richard folded his arms more tightly, convinced this experiment would end in embarrassment. Then Ava leaned slightly closer to one section of the display. Hidden inside thousands of variables sat a small predictive parameter automatically inherited from an older acquisition model completed nearly 3 years earlier. She smiled almost imperceptibly. "There," she whispered. Nathan stepped closer. "What did you find?" Ava pointed toward the highlighted variable. "This system is still assuming that 2 independent suppliers share the same geopolitical risk profile. They stopped operating under the same regulations 18 months ago. Every calculation after that point is mathematically correct." She looked toward Nathan with calm certainty. "It is the original assumption that is wrong." With his permission, she changed a single parameter. Nothing more. The artificial intelligence immediately began recalculating millions of projections. One warning indicator disappeared. Then another. Crimson graphs gradually shifted into calm blue. Shipping routes stabilized. Risk exposure declined. Financial confidence climbed higher with every passing second until the acquisition model displayed a successful completion probability of 98.7%. Nobody spoke. Richard stared at the screen without blinking. One analyst quietly repeated the simulation on his own computer. Another verified the corrected model independently. Every result matched perfectly. Ava stepped back from the console as naturally as if she had simply finished polishing a window. She folded her hands respectfully before speaking. The system never failed, sir. It only remained loyal to a question that should have been changed long ago. Nathan Sterling looked at the restored projections, then slowly turned toward the quiet young woman standing before him. For the first time in his entire career, the billionaire who had trusted only credentials and experience found himself speechless before someone the world had never thought to notice. For nearly 10 full seconds, the boardroom remained frozen in absolute silence. The restored projections continued glowing across the massive display walls, replacing the crimson warning signals with calm shades of blue, yet no one seemed capable of accepting what had just happened. One by one, the specialists began opening their laptops again, convinced there had to be another explanation. A senior data scientist reran the simulation using an independent server. The chief financial analyst manually recalculated the acquisition model from the beginning. An artificial intelligence engineer initiated a complete verification of the predictive algorithm. Every system produced exactly the same conclusion. Ava Brooks had corrected the only assumption that truly mattered. Richard Coleman slowly stood from his chair, his expression no longer confident but unsettled. "Run it again," he instructed sharply. "Every variable." The engineering team obeyed immediately. 5 minutes later, the lead analyst looked toward Nathan Sterling. "The results are consistent. The revised model is mathematically sound. We should proceed with the acquisition." A quiet wave of disbelief swept through the room. Nathan remained perfectly still, his blue eyes fixed on Ava. Throughout his career, he had trusted evidence above emotion, and the evidence now stood before him in the form of a young woman wearing a simple gray housekeeping uniform. Yet nothing about her appearance matched what she had just accomplished. "Miss Brooks," Nathan said calmly, "where did you learn to analyze systems like this?" Ava lowered her eyes politely. "Life teaches people to notice patterns when mistakes become too expensive to ignore." Richard frowned. "That is not an answer." Ava looked toward him respectfully. "It is the only honest one I can give." Nathan noticed something important. She never tried to make herself appear mysterious. She simply answered without revealing more than she believed necessary. There was no arrogance in her voice, only quiet sincerity. Before anyone could continue questioning her, an assistant entered the boardroom carrying the finalized acquisition documents. "Sir," she said carefully, "the overseas legal team is waiting for your authorization." Nathan glanced once more toward the corrected projections before signing the final approval. The acquisition that had nearly collapsed only minutes earlier was officially secured. Around the table, exhausted executives released long breaths of relief, while several consultants congratulated one another, though everyone knew exactly who had changed the outcome. Nathan turned back toward Ava. "Please remain after the meeting." Before she could answer, her eyes shifted toward the hallway clock. It was nearly 10 o'clock. She offered an apologetic smile. "I am sorry, sir, but the executive offices still need to be cleaned before the afternoon meetings begin. If I delay much longer, the next conference rooms will not be ready." Several executives looked at one another in complete disbelief. She was thinking about cleaning schedules after saving a $12 billion acquisition. Nathan studied her expression carefully. There was no trace of false modesty. She genuinely believed her unfinished work still mattered. "You are free to go," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir." Ava walked calmly back to the doorway, picked up the handle of her housekeeping cart, and continued down the marble corridor exactly as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She greeted a passing receptionist with a warm smile before disappearing around the corner. The boardroom remained unusually quiet even after she had gone. Richard finally broke the silence. "She got lucky." No one answered him. Nathan slowly closed the acquisition file and looked toward the doorway where Ava had disappeared. "Luck does not identify a hidden assumption buried inside millions of calculations," he replied. "Luck does not remain calm while 20 experts argue." Richard crossed his arms. "Then explain her." Nathan looked back toward the skyline beyond the glass walls. "That," he said thoughtfully, "is exactly what I intend to do." He pressed the intercom button on the conference table. "Security records, human resources, employment archives." I want every available file on Ava Brooks delivered to my office before noon. Within minutes, discrete requests began moving through Sterling Dynamics' internal systems. Personnel records were retrieved. Employment histories were reviewed. Background checks were reopened. Yet as the information slowly appeared on Nathan's desk, one unexpected fact became immediately clear. The woman who had quietly saved his company seemed to have almost no past at all, and the more they searched for the truth about Ava Brooks, the less they actually found. By noon, Sterling Dynamics had returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. Employees celebrated the successful acquisition, congratulatory emails filled executive inboxes, and financial news outlets praised the company for completing one of the largest technology deals of the year. Yet inside Nathan Sterling's office, another investigation had quietly begun. A thin digital folder rested on his desk containing everything human resources had managed to collect about Ava Brooks. Nathan reviewed every page carefully. 28 years old. Housekeeping employee. Nearly 2 years with the company's facilities contractor. Excellent attendance. Outstanding performance evaluations. No disciplinary history. A modest apartment in Brooklyn. An emergency contact listed as a local nursing care residence. Previous jobs included hotel housekeeping, bookstore inventory, and part-time administrative support. Nothing else explained the extraordinary brilliance he had witnessed that morning. He pressed the intercom. Send Daniel Harper in. Minutes later, his chief of staff entered carrying another tablet. You wanted an update? Nathan nodded. Tell me what we missed. Daniel sighed quietly. That is exactly the problem. We have searched every available employment record, educational archive, licensing database, and public profile. There is almost nothing unusual. Nathan looked unconvinced. Someone capable of correcting an artificial intelligence acquisition model in under a minute does not simply appear from nowhere. Daniel hesitated before answering. Unless she has spent years making sure nobody noticed. Those words lingered in the room. Nathan closed the folder and stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. During his career, he had met brilliant entrepreneurs who enjoyed attention, celebrated researchers who collected awards, and ambitious executives who constantly reminded others of their accomplishments. Ava Brooks had done the exact opposite. She had quietly solved the company's greatest crisis and immediately returned to cleaning conference rooms. The contradiction refused to leave his thoughts. Across the building, Richard Coleman remained equally interested, although for very different reasons. Sitting inside his spacious executive office, he replayed the morning meeting again and again. His confidence had always rested on one belief. Expertise belonged to people with elite credentials, prestigious universities, and influential careers. Ava's existence challenged everything he believed about success. He called one of the senior operations managers. Do not let her know, Richard said calmly, but I want to observe her work over the next several days. I need to know whether this morning was brilliance or unbelievable luck. That afternoon, the first unexpected opportunity appeared. A logistics coordinator rushed into the executive administration area carrying several shipping manifests with visible concern. 2 identical prototype servers scheduled for delivery to separate research facilities had somehow received reversed destination labels. If the mistake was not corrected within the hour, the wrong equipment would arrive at each location, delaying an important product launch. Several employees gathered around the paperwork trying to identify where the mix-up had occurred. Ava happened to be polishing the glass display case nearby. She listened quietly without interrupting. After a few moments, she looked toward the confused coordinator. May I ask one question? The coordinator nodded. Were the labels printed before or after the warehouse changed carriers last month? He blinked. Before. Ava smiled gently. Then the old routing template probably assigned both shipments using the previous regional sequence. Everyone checked the digital records. She was correct. The templates had automatically generated outdated destination codes after the transportation system was upgraded. The error was corrected within minutes. One employee looked at Ava with open surprise. How did you know that? She continued wiping the glass as though nothing unusual had happened. Systems remember old habits longer than people do, she answered softly. From the second-floor balcony overlooking the administration area, Richard watched the entire exchange without saying a word. He had expected coincidence. Instead, He had witnessed another impossible observation made by someone who never sought recognition. For the first time since joining Sterling Dynamics, Richard felt the uncomfortable possibility that the greatest challenge to his career might not come from another executive, but from a quiet woman carrying a housekeeping cart who seemed able to see what everyone else overlooked. The days that followed brought an unusual change to Sterling Dynamics, although almost no one understood the reason. Nathan Sterling no longer hurried past the ordinary corners of his own company. Instead, he quietly walked through departments he had rarely visited before, observing conversations, watching employees solve problems, and paying closer attention to people whose names he had never taken the time to learn. Somewhere beneath the polished routines of the organization, he believed another answer about Ava Brooks was waiting to reveal itself. Richard Coleman, however, had reached a different conclusion. If Ava truly possessed extraordinary ability, she would eventually expose herself. If she had simply been fortunate, careful observation would prove it. Without informing Nathan, Richard instructed several department managers to document every unusual interaction involving the quiet housekeeper. He never asked anyone to interfere with her work. He simply wanted evidence. 3 days later, another unexpected situation unfolded. The marketing division prepared for an important presentation before several international partners when every conference room display suddenly began showing different versions of the same presentation. Charts disappeared. Financial numbers no longer matched. Panic spread quickly as employees searched through cloud storage, convinced someone had corrupted the files. Information technology specialists rushed into the room, checking servers and network connections while anxious executives debated whether to postpone the meeting. Ava happened to be replacing fresh flowers near the entrance. She paused for only a moment before quietly watching several employees argue over identical laptops displaying different information. After listening without interrupting, she gently asked, "Did everyone open the presentation from the same shared folder?" One manager answered immediately, "Of course." Ava tilted her head thoughtfully. "Or did everyone open files with the same name stored in different locations?" The room suddenly became quiet. An information technology engineer quickly searched the shared network and discovered 3 separate presentation folders created during previous revisions. Because each folder carried nearly identical names, employees had unknowingly edited different versions for several days. The latest approved presentation had never been missing. It had simply remained unopened. Within minutes, the correct file appeared on every screen, and the meeting proceeded exactly on schedule. Richard happened to witness the entire exchange through the conference room's glass wall. His expression grew more serious than ever before. Once again, Ava had not solved the problem through technical complexity. She had solved it by questioning the assumption everyone else had accepted without hesitation. That evening, Nathan remained in his office long after sunset, reviewing the few facts he actually knew about Ava. The puzzle continued to grow larger instead of smaller. She possessed extraordinary analytical instincts, yet her employment history reflected only ordinary jobs. She solved problems without seeking recognition. She never mentioned her past. She declined praise as naturally as most people accepted it. None of those qualities fit the ambitious personalities Nathan had encountered throughout his career. The following afternoon, he unexpectedly saw Ava leaving the building after finishing her shift. Instead of heading toward an expensive restaurant or meeting friends downtown, she walked several quiet blocks before boarding a subway train toward Brooklyn. Curious but careful to respect her privacy, Nathan chose not to follow. Later that evening, Daniel Harper entered Nathan's office carrying one additional report that had arrived from a background verification agency. "We finally found one detail," Daniel said. Nathan immediately looked up. "What is it?" Daniel placed the document on the desk. Nearly 8 years ago, Ava Brooks received one of the country's most competitive academic research scholarships. Nathan's eyes narrowed with surprise. "Where?" "The records stop there," Daniel answered quietly. "The scholarship was accepted, then voluntarily withdrawn only a few months later. No explanation was ever recorded." Nathan stared at the single page for several long moments. It was the first piece of evidence connecting Ava to the extraordinary intelligence she had displayed inside the boardroom. Yet instead of answering the mystery, it raised an even greater question. Why would someone gifted enough to earn one of the nation's highest academic honors willingly walk away from a future that countless others could only dream of? The answer arrived on an unusually warm Thursday afternoon when Sterling Dynamics hosted the National Innovation Leadership Forum, an annual gathering that brought together renowned professors, technology pioneers, corporate executives, and research institutions from across the United States. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, while floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the autumn sun. Nathan Sterling personally welcomed distinguished guests at the entrance. Richard Coleman supervised executive presentations with his usual confidence, and employees throughout the company worked quietly behind the scenes to ensure every detail reflected the organization's reputation for excellence. Among them, Ava Brooks followed the same routine she had repeated countless times before. Wearing her neat gray housekeeping uniform, she carefully adjusted floral arrangements, polished conference tables, and made certain every guest would enter an immaculate environment. She moved with quiet efficiency, almost invisible among the hundreds of attendees arriving for the event. Shortly before the keynote presentation began, a distinguished elderly gentleman entered the ballroom accompanied by university officials and scientific advisors. His silver hair, calm smile, and unmistakable presence immediately attracted respectful attention from everyone nearby. Professor Benjamin Whitmore had spent more than 4 decades teaching advanced systems engineering and computational decision science at one of the nation's most prestigious universities. His research had influenced generations of innovators, and his opening address had become the centerpiece of the entire conference. As Professor Whitmore walked through the reception hall greeting colleagues, his eyes unexpectedly stopped on Ava, who was quietly arranging water glasses near the entrance. He remained motionless for several seconds before slowly removing his glasses, as though questioning whether he had recognized the right person. Finally, a warm smile spread across his face. "Ava," he said softly. Ava looked up in surprise. The moment she recognized him, genuine happiness appeared in her eyes. "Professor Whitmore," she replied warmly. "It has been a long time." The simple exchange immediately caught Nathan's attention from across the room. Richard also noticed the unusual familiarity between one of the country's most respected professors and a housekeeping employee. Curious conversations began spreading quietly among the guests. Nathan approached with polite curiosity. "Professor Whitmore," he said, "you know Miss Brooks?" The professor looked genuinely astonished. "Know her?" He smiled proudly before turning back toward Ava. "Young lady, I have told your story to every graduating class for the past 8 years." The surrounding conversations faded into complete silence. Professor Whitmore continued, his voice carrying naturally across the elegant ballroom. "Nathan, this remarkable woman was one of the most gifted minds I have encountered during my entire academic career. Before she turned 21, Ava developed predictive systems that visiting researchers twice her age struggled to understand. She earned the highest research scholarship our university had awarded in more than a decade." Richard's confident expression disappeared completely. Nathan stood speechless. Professor Whitmore gently looked at Ava before continuing. "The country's finest laboratories competed to recruit her. We believed she would become one of the leading scientific minds of her generation." Nathan finally asked the question that had occupied his thoughts for days. "Then why did she disappear?" Ava lowered her eyes with quiet humility before answering. "Because my mother became seriously ill." Professor Whitmore nodded gently. "She came to my office one afternoon carrying the scholarship documents. I thought she wanted to celebrate. Instead, she quietly thanked everyone who had believed in her, withdrew from the program, and chose to care for her mother full-time. She never asked for sympathy. She simply said that some opportunities can wait, but people we love cannot." The ballroom remained completely silent. Nathan suddenly remembered the nursing care residents listed as Ava's emergency contact. Every missing piece finally aligned. The mysterious records, the abandoned scholarship, the ordinary jobs, and the extraordinary wisdom all belonged to the same story. Ava had never abandoned brilliance. She had simply chosen compassion over ambition, and in that quiet decision, she had revealed a kind of greatness that no degree, title, or fortune could ever measure. The grand ballroom remained wrapped in an extraordinary silence. Conversations that had filled the elegant hall only moments earlier faded into complete stillness as hundreds of distinguished guests looked toward Ava Brooks with entirely different eyes. The woman they had casually passed while entering the conference was no longer simply a housekeeping employee arranging flowers and preparing meeting rooms. She had suddenly become the brilliant scholar that one of the nation's most respected professors openly admired. Nathan Sterling stood motionless beside Professor Benjamin Whitmore, replaying every conversation he had shared with Ava since the acquisition crisis. He remembered her calm voice, her thoughtful observations, her refusal to seek attention, and the quiet dignity she carried into every ordinary task. For the first time in years, Nathan realized he had spent his career searching for greatness inside impressive resumes, while genuine greatness had been quietly walking through his own headquarters every single day. Richard Coleman remained several steps behind, unable to hide the discomfort on his face. The certainty that had defined him for years had disappeared. He had spent his entire career believing that excellence could always be recognized through prestigious titles, executive offices, and elite credentials. Yet the woman he had dismissed in front of the boardroom had possessed all those qualifications long before he had ever met her. He simply had never bothered to look beyond her uniform. Nathan slowly stepped toward Ava. Every executive, researcher, investor, and university representative watched in complete silence. There was no prepared speech, no corporate announcement, and no carefully planned public relations moment. Only sincerity remained. Nathan looked directly into Ava's eyes before speaking. "Miss Brooks, I owe you more than gratitude. I owe you an apology." Ava immediately shook her head with gentle humility. "Sir, there is nothing to apologize for." Nathan answered quietly. "There is." He paused for a moment before continuing. "When I first met you, I believed I was giving one unexpected opportunity to someone who happened to notice a mistake. Today I understand the truth. The opportunity was never mine to give. The privilege was mine to recognize." The audience remained completely still. Nathan continued with complete honesty. "I trusted credentials because they had never failed me before. I trusted titles because they usually represented experience. But I forgot something far more important. Character introduces itself long before a resume does." Several executives lowered their eyes, remembering the morning they had watched Ava enter the boardroom with her housekeeping cart. Richard slowly stepped forward, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, he looked at Ava and spoke with genuine humility. "I judged your position before I understood your ability. I believed intelligence always announced itself through status. I was wrong, and I sincerely apologize." Ava smiled with the same quiet kindness she had shown from the very beginning. There was no satisfaction in proving anyone wrong, no trace of resentment. She simply answered, "Every one of us sees the world through our own experiences. What matters is whether we choose to see more clearly tomorrow than we did yesterday." Professor Whitmore smiled proudly, recognizing the same grace that had once inspired an entire university. Nathan looked toward the audience filling the ballroom. "Sterling Dynamics exists because people solve difficult problems," he said. "Beginning today, I want this company to become equally committed to recognizing remarkable people before the world tells us who they are." Warm applause slowly filled the ballroom, not because of a business announcement, but because everyone present understood they had witnessed something deeply human. Ava quietly thanked Professor Whitmore for his kind words before gently returning the empty water glasses to a nearby service table. Even after becoming the center of the conference, she naturally resumed helping others without expecting anyone to notice. Nathan watched her for a long moment and finally understood what had impressed him most from the beginning. It had never been the speed with which she solved impossible problems. It was the extraordinary humility that remained completely unchanged before success, before admiration, and before recognition. In that quiet moment, he realized that true greatness is never measured by how brightly someone shines when the spotlight finds them, but by how faithfully they continue serving others after the applause has faded. The Monday following the Innovation Forum marked the beginning of a quiet transformation inside Sterling Dynamics. Employees noticed small changes before they heard any official announcement. Executive meeting invitations no longer listed only senior managers. Suggestion boards appeared in departments that had never been asked for ideas before. Receptionists, maintenance workers, administrative assistants, engineers, security officers, and interns all received the same message from human resources. Every voice mattered. Every perspective deserved to be heard. Behind those changes stood a single conversation taking place inside Nathan Sterling's office. Morning sunlight filled the spacious executive suite as Manhattan stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nathan stood beside the conference table while Ava Brooks entered wearing the same modest gray housekeeping uniform she had worn every day since joining the company. Nothing about her appearance suggested she had become the most talked-about person in Sterling Dynamics. She greeted Nathan with the same calm smile she had always carried. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Nathan nodded warmly. "Please, have a seat." He placed a carefully prepared folder in front of her. "This is not a reward," he said. "It is an opportunity to help build something better." Ava opened the folder slowly. Inside was a proposal for a newly created leadership position called Director of Innovation Culture, a role designed to encourage collaboration across every level of the company while ensuring that valuable ideas would never again be ignored because of someone's job title. Nathan watched quietly as Ava finished reading each page. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up. "Why me?" she asked sincerely. Nathan smiled. "Because every executive I have ever hired knew how to improve systems. You taught me how to improve people." The room became peaceful once again. Ava remained thoughtful for several moments before speaking. "If I accept this position, I would like one promise. Anything within my power." She folded her hands gently. "I do not want this role to exist because of me. I want it to exist because the next person with a good idea might never have to wonder whether anyone will listen." Nathan answered without hesitation. "You have my word." 2 weeks later, Sterling Dynamics introduced a company-wide initiative called Open Minds. Every month, employees from every department gathered in mixed teams to solve real business challenges together. Housekeeping staff sat beside software engineers. Security officers shared ideas with financial analysts. Receptionists contributed alongside senior executives. At first, many people felt uncertain. Years of organizational habits were not easily forgotten. Then something remarkable began happening. A maintenance technician suggested an energy-saving improvement that reduced operating costs across 3 buildings. A receptionist redesigned visitor scheduling, cutting average wait times in half. A warehouse employee proposed a simpler inventory process that eliminated thousands of unnecessary shipping delays each year. Nathan attended every session, listening far more than he spoke. Richard Coleman also joined, although his role had quietly changed. Instead of evaluating only technical expertise, he now encouraged every participant to explain how they reached their conclusions. Over time, his leadership became noticeably humbler, shaped by the lesson Ava had unknowingly taught him. One afternoon, Nathan found Ava walking through the executive hallway after finishing an innovation workshop. Although she now held one of the company's newest leadership positions, she still greeted every employee exactly as she had before. She stopped to thank custodians for preparing meeting rooms, asked receptionists about their families, and congratulated interns on successful presentations. Nothing about recognition had changed the person she had always been. Nathan walked beside her and smiled. "Do you ever miss the life you imagined when you were younger?" Ava looked toward the sunlight pouring through the glass walls before answering softly. "The future I once imagined disappeared many years ago. But sometimes life gives us something even better than the dream we planned. It gives us the chance to become exactly the person someone else needs." Nathan quietly reflected on those words as employees throughout Sterling Dynamics continued sharing ideas across every level of the company. At that moment, he realized the greatest innovation his organization would ever create was not another product, another acquisition, or another technological breakthrough. It was a culture where respect arrived before judgment, where dignity mattered more than titles, and where extraordinary people would never again remain invisible simply because of the uniform they happened to wear. 1 year later, Sterling Dynamics no longer resembled the company it had once been. Business magazines praised its remarkable financial growth. International partners admired its culture of collaboration, and universities began studying its leadership model as an example of how innovation could flourish when every voice was valued. Yet the achievement Nathan Sterling appreciated most could never be measured by quarterly reports or market performance. It could be seen every morning inside the headquarters lobby as employees from every department greeted one another with genuine respect, no longer defined by titles, but united by purpose. The company had become stronger because people had finally learned to listen before they judged. On a bright autumn morning, Nathan entered the building earlier than usual. He paused in the spacious atrium where sunlight poured through towering glass walls, illuminating the engraved words that now welcomed everyone who walked through the front entrance. The message had become the guiding principle of Sterling Dynamics. Great ideas do not wear job titles. Employees often stopped to read those words before beginning their workday, and many quietly smiled because they knew the story behind them. Nathan looked around the lobby as teams gathered for another Open Minds workshop. Engineers discussed ideas with custodians. Receptionists exchanged suggestions with software developers. Executives listened attentively to interns presenting fresh perspectives. The invisible barriers that had once divided departments had quietly disappeared. A few moments later, Ava Brooks entered the building carrying a simple notebook and a warm cup of coffee. Although she now led innovation culture across the organization, nothing about her demeanor had changed. She still greeted the security officers by name, thanked the housekeeping team for preparing the meeting rooms, and stopped to congratulate a young administrative assistant who had recently proposed a successful customer service improvement. Titles had changed, responsibilities had grown, but kindness remained the same. Nathan walked over with a smile. "Good morning, Ava." "Good morning, Nathan." He glanced toward the busy lobby. "Do you remember the day you stood outside the boardroom with your housekeeping cart?" Ava laughed softly. "It feels like another lifetime." Nathan nodded. "That morning I believed I was surrounded by the smartest people in the country. I was wrong." Ava looked at him curiously. "You were not wrong," she replied gently. "You simply had not met everyone yet." They both smiled. Her answer reflected the same quiet wisdom that had changed so many lives. Later that afternoon, Nathan accompanied Ava to the nursing care residence in Brooklyn. Her mother had recently regained enough strength to spend time outdoors in the garden, surrounded by colorful flowers and the peaceful sounds of children playing in a nearby park. As the three of them shared slices of warm apple pie beneath the gentle autumn sunlight, Nathan listened to Ava's mother speak with unmistakable pride. "She always believed that success meant helping people," her mother said softly, even when nobody was watching. Nathan understood those words more deeply than ever before. Every major success Sterling Dynamics had achieved during the past year could be traced back to one quiet moment when a young woman wearing a gray housekeeping uniform chose to speak with courage instead of remaining silent. Before leaving, Ava looked across the peaceful garden and smiled. "Life has a wonderful way of surprising us," she said. "Sometimes the opportunity we lose simply makes room for the purpose we were meant to find." As the sun slowly settled beyond the Manhattan skyline that evening, the lights inside Sterling Dynamics began shining across the city once again. Employees continued sharing ideas, learning from one another, and building a future founded on respect instead of assumptions. Nathan quietly reflected on the lesson that had transformed both his company and his own heart. Wealth could open doors. Intelligence could solve difficult problems. Experience could build successful businesses. But only humility could reveal the extraordinary value hidden inside ordinary people. And perhaps that is why the greatest stories are never truly about billionaires or brilliant minds alone. They are about the quiet courage to see another human being before seeing the uniform they wear. Because the world changes forever when respect becomes the first impression instead of the last.